Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on creating a centralized authentication server using OpenLDAP and NSLCD using Ubuntu. You can get all the commands from this article. I will leave the link of this article in the description section. I have already created two VirtualBox VMs. I will be using two network interfaces on both the VMs, wherein one of the interfaces would be used for intercommunication, while the other one would be used to connect to the internet and download packages. As you can see in the network section, I have two adapters over here. One is with NAT. In the NAT, I will be using port forwarding to perform SSH to my VM. I have used a very random port number over here. You do not worry about this. The important part is the guest port. So basically, whenever I'm connecting to this VM using 1001, I will be connecting to port 22 inside the VM. And the other adapter would be the host-only adapter, which is used for only internal communication between both the LDAP servers and the client. The same configuration is there on the other VM as well. One would be host-only adapter, the other would be NAT, with port forwarding again with a different random host port, while the guest port remains 22. By default, VirtualBox will have a host-only adapter configuration, but in my case, I have given a customized network option, as you can see here. By default, in VirtualBox, the host-only adapter configuration will be present, but in my case, I have given a default configuration for the DHCP server. You can also give the same. You can go to Tools, create your own network. So in my case, I have given the DHCP server details like these. Next, let's connect to the VM. In my case, I will be using Visual Studio Code to connect to the VMs. So this is my LDAP server, but I'm sure you'll be confused because the host name is not matching. So let me set the host name of the server. So we can directly refer this VM via the host name, which is more readable. Done. Let's log out. Log in again. And as you can see, my host name is updated. I can do the same on the LDAP client as well. Let me increase the size. Right. Let me log out and log in again. So as you can see, now I have my LDAP server as well as LDAP client. So on the LDAP server, okay, I don't have a config installed. As you can see, I have two interfaces. This is with the NAT interface where the IP is static, it will not change, while the other one is at the host-only adapter where the IP is 28. Same we can verify on the client. The first one would be NAT, which we use for SSH, while the other one is for host-only adapter. Now, obviously, I don't want to use IP address every time I have to connect to the client or the server, so I'll update the etc host file. And if I am not wrong, the IP of the client was 26. We can copy this content. Yes, 26. And we can also update the host file of client machine. That's it. Now I can directly use the host name to connect to LDAP server from the client. And I can use the host name from LDAP server to connect to the client. So I don't have to worry about the IP address and changing of IP address anymore. For my case, let me disable the firewall. I don't want to work with the firewall. But if you want to work with the firewall, you can leave comments and I can share the command which is required to open the port. Normally we will use 389 port or 636 port based on the kind of security what we have enabled. Now that the firewall is disabled, let's start with the OpenLDAP configuration. First of all, we have to perform an update to make sure all our repositories are up to date before we start downloading any package. Next, we'll install the required packages. This will prompt us for the LDAP admin password. We can give a strong password over here. That should be it, and it will take care of the remaining part of the installation. So the LDAP server is installed properly. Next, we need to configure the OpenLDAP server. We'll use this command to reconfigure slapd. It is asking to omit the server configuration. We'll select no. We have to provide a DNS domain name over here. I will use glc.example.com, where GLC stands for Go Linux Cloud. You can choose the domain name as per your preference or environment. Select OK. Give your organization name. I will use example at the moment. Again, you can change this as per your preference. It is again asking for the administrator password since we chose for a reconfiguration. Now it is up to you. You can give the same password what you gave during installation, or you can give a new password. I will stick to the password what I gave during installation. Do you want the database to be removed when slapd is purged? No. Do you want to move the old database? Yes. Okay, so our OpenLDAP server configuration is complete. Now just to make sure whatever password you gave is working perfectly and to verify your configurations, we can use this command. Write the password what you gave for the admin user. As you can remember, this is the domain name what I gave in my case, glcexample.com. We can also perform another command search, which will show us all the entries in our domain name at the moment. So as you can see, it is printing the entire OpenLDAP content what we have at this stage on our database. Next, we have to add the required schemas because those are required as you plan to integrate your LDAP server with Linux clients. So when you're creating a Linux user, they have to form or they have to be part of a certain schema. So we have to make sure those schemas are also part of the LDAP server. Now, at the moment, let's check what are the schemas which are available on our LDAP server. As you can see at the moment, I have these schemas already available, and these are the bare minimum schemas which are required for you to be able to integrate a Linux client with the OpenLDAP server. Now, since I have all the basic schemas already loaded, so I don't have to load any further schemas. But in case for your use case, if you want to load any further schemas, I have demonstrated the steps, how you can check the schemas and how you can load them based on your requirement. All the default schemas are part of this folder. You can navigate to that folder and load those schemas, or you can also create your own custom schema and load it. For the time being, I'll skip this step and I'll move on to the next step to create the organizational units. Now these OUs basically act as a local or logical containers where we keep all our users and groups organized. Let me create a new file where I will declare the OUs to be created. We will create one OU people and groups. The content can be collected from the article which I shared. I'll be just using those content as reference and creating the OUs. So the OUs are properly created. Next, we will create users and groups, but before creating the users and groups, we have to also create the hashed password. We cannot give password in plain text to the LDAP users. So LDAP offers a command called slap password. We can just execute the command, provide the password what we want to use in plain text format, repeat the password, and we'll get a hashed format password. Now we can use this password while creating users, the LDAP users. We'll create another LDIF file which we will use to create the users. In this case, I'll be creating two users as developer1 and developer2. Let me correct the password which I just, okay, I think the password is gone. I'll rerun the command. Here I will copy this. I have to paste it in this section, in the user password section. That's it. You can follow the rest of the template as it is, while you can change some of the fields based on your convenience, the username, the login shell, UID numbers, and other fields. Let me save this file. Next, I'll create the users. And the command execution is successful. Now we will create some groups. Yeah, so it is successful. Now we will verify if all the entries are present as what we have created. We see a long output. Okay, so here is the domain information. We have the user created properly, developer 1, developer 2, we have the groups created properly. Okay, so everything what we created is available on the LDAP server. Next, we can move on to the LDAP client so that we can start with the integration process. Here also we'll have to perform an update to make sure our repositories are up to date. Okay, the command is successful. Next, we will install the packages required for the integration. These will install the required PAM modules, NSS module required for the user lookup and authentication. The NSLCD will be the package what we will use for the integration. So this is asking us the location or the path of the LDAP server. Now at this stage, we have not configured LDAP S, so we will be using LDAP. Maybe in the next tutorial, I'll try to show you the steps how to secure a LDAP server, then maybe we'll modify this. But for the time being, we will give LDAP-server because we have already updated our etc host file. So we don't have to worry about the IP address. Here we have to provide the domain name, what we had used. Now in our case, if you remember, we had given glc.example.com. So the same has to be added over here. Now, in this case, we have to mark all those services where we want to use the LDAP server for our authentication. Now, for normal authentication, we only need to use password, group, and shadow. Wherein the password file contains the user entries like home, shell, etc. The group contains all the group members, while shadow is used for the authentication. We don't need anything else at this stage, so we'll leave them. Click OK. At this stage, the backend configuration files will be updated with all the entries what we have given. Okay, so it is done. Now let's verify some of the configuration files which should have been updated. One of them is NSSWITCH configuration files. As you can see, the password, group, and shadow has been updated with an entry for LDAP. So what basically we are saying is that whenever I perform a user lookup request, the very first request should land on the files, which is basically etc password. Next should go on the systemd service. If the user is still not found, go to SSS. And if it is still not found, then try to find it on the LDAP server. So we have kept LDAP as the very last option because these are acting as the preference order. In your case, if you think LDAP should be acting or looked up first, you can change the order and move LDAP to the first entry. In my case, I'll leave it to like this only. Next, we have to go to the NSLCD configuration file, which is the main file. We have to create the bind DN and bind password. I will use admin user here. We have one extra entry for GLC. Example.com. Bind password. Unfortunately, we have to add it in plain text, not very secure, but that is how it is. For the time being, I will turn off SSL because we have not configured SSL. And that should be it. We will restart NSLCD. Let's verify the status. It seems to be running. We also have to make sure that the service will start automatically post reboot. So it is enabled. We don't have to worry. Next, let me try to fetch the user details because we are done with the configuration or integration of the client. Perfect. So as you remember, this user was created on the LDAP server. This user does not exist on the client. If I try to find it in the etc password, I don't find it because it does not exist on the system. But I'm still able to look up that user from the LDAP server. Let's try the same for developer 2. And yes, we're getting the same user there. We can also try ID command. As you can see, the groups what we had added, the user. So this means our centralized authentication server is working, at least in terms of user lookup. Next is to verify the authentication, the actual authentication, whether it works or not, right? So I'll try to do a switch. I'll use the password which I had created and assigned. Okay, so authentication also is working perfectly for the user, but you do see a warning wherein it says that the home folder, whatever we assigned to the user, is not available. Hence, it has just switched to a random folder. Now, this was an expected message because we have not created the home folder. These are AD users, right? Available on OpenLDAP. Now, by default, if you had created a system user, they have provisions to create the home directory of the user as soon as you log in, but that's not the case with LDAP server. Now, if you want to automate these steps for an AD user, we have some steps for that. First of all, make sure this module is loaded on your system. If it is not available, then you can install the same using this step. But in my case, since it is already loaded, I'll skip that. Next, we have to modify these files. Now, the steps may vary on a different distribution, like you should not try the same steps on Rocky or Red Hat or Fedora, because these steps are pretty much only limited to Ubuntu. Now we have to open this file, and towards the end of this file, we have to add this particular entry. You can align. Next, we have to change one more file. Go to the last line. We'll add the same entry here as well. If required, we can align here as well, but it's not absolutely mandatory. Save the file. Now we can try to switch again. We'll try different user this time. As you can see, the user's home directory was automatically created this time. And the authentication was also successful. So if you have done these steps, you don't have to worry about creating the home directory of the user every time the LDAP server user tries to log into your Linux VM. Now, since the basic authentication is working at the system level, we will go one step ahead and we'll try to authenticate the user also on Apache web server. So for that, we will also install Apache on our Linux cloud. My default user is installed. Now for the authentication from LDAP server to work on Apache, we have to enable certain modules. This is one of those modules, and this is the other module. Next, we will perform some basic configuration before we restart Apache 2 so that we have all the configuration in place. We'll open the default configuration file where we can add the virtual hosts. By default, we have a virtual host entry. Now, since this is a very first time I'm installing Apache, so I'll delete everything and I'll provide a new configuration. But in your case, if you already have some entries, I would suggest not to delete them and you just update them with the new configuration. I'll modify this page to use up till this path and restart the Apache web server. We'll verify the status to make sure the service is running properly. Service is running perfectly fine. Next, we can go to the web server to make sure our web server is able to show the login page. Okay, so we can try to log in over here using our username. So our authentication is perfectly fine, and we are able to log into the default page of the Apache. That's it for today. So in this tutorial, we have covered how to set up a complete centralized authentication server, and we also showed you how to integrate a Linux client with the authentication server and demonstrated the authentication working on the system level as well as the Apache web server. If you have any doubts or questions, please feel free to reach out to us using the comment sections. Thank you.